listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the damning new analysis that exposes the great generational divide and why so many young people are facing greater challenges today than their parents or grandparents. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 28th of October. A 42-year-old woman has been arrested after allegedly sabotaging gas mains at two hospitals in Sydney. It happened in the city's south earlier this morning, where police say the woman allegedly cut both the gas and water mains. Here is New South Wales Health Minister Ryan Park.
Someone has been able to access a restricted area, climbed into a restricted area and essentially turned off medical gases.
Minister Park says it could have been catastrophic. Authorities say emergency protocols were activated and one of the hospitals had to rely on portable oxygen. Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke has confirmed Australia has deported the first member of the NZYQ cohort to Nauru, marking the start of its $2.5 billion deal. The arrival of the first member on Friday under the new deal kicks off the Australian government's controversial plan to see more than 350 former immigration detainees removed from the country. The federal government says it's working methodically through the non-citizens who are on a removal pathway, with the timeline remaining unclear. Investigations are underway after an 80-year-old woman died after failing to board a cruise ship on the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland. It's believed the tourist, who was travelling alone, died while on a hiking expedition on Lizard Island. She wasn't reported missing for some time, with the crew initially suspecting she may have fallen overboard. After a search and rescue operation, authorities found the elderly woman's body on Sunday on Lizard Island. Authorities are now investigating why she was left behind and if she could have been saved. And as thousands of students sit their final Year 12 exams, one of Queensland's top state high schools has admitted to teaching the wrong content for an ancient history exam. Brisbane State High School has admitted students were taught the unit on Augustus instead of Julius Caesar for the test being held tomorrow. The school has apologised and is now working with the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority on a solution for affected students. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the generational divide that is breaking so many young people. From skyrocketing education costs, the housing crisis, to loneliness, we unpack the 5 greatest challenges facing young Australians in 2025 and the solutions we all must work towards. Joining us is Intifar Chowdhury, youth researcher and a lecturer in government at Flinders University. Intifar, fascinating research about exactly what, and I don't want to use this analogy, but basically what's causing the most stress for so many young Australians at the moment. Top of the list is education, higher education. Were you surprised by these results?
I wasn't surprised by it because over the years, and I have been sort of burnt by this as well, the requirement is to do more education in order to get even a low-paid job. So for my parents' generation, let's say, what the case was, if you drew tertiary education, for example, that was kind of the recipe to a stable professional job. But now it takes more of that education. So you got to study a little bit longer. So a bachelor's degree is probably not enough. You got to do honors or master's. And that means that you are accruing more debt. And the debt size is also ballooning up. So basically, you're doing more of something you don't want to necessarily do, and it's costing you more for a longer period of time.
I'm glad you mentioned the actual loan debt for the average student. The stats show now, if they're in their 20s, that debt has more than doubled, increasing by 145%. That is staggering.
Yeah, absolutely. It means we're burdening young people in a time of their lives where they're trying to get to key markers of adulthood, like getting a house or, getting into a stable relationship, getting together and planning a family, for example. We're essentially robbing young people of it by placing more debt onto them for a longer period of time. Now, the Labor government has attempted to ease that debt by increasing the threshold of the payment this year, which is a welcome effort, but this does not necessarily help the number of years that you will be paying debt as a young person, as an average young person, which has also increased in the last decade or so by about 40%.
Yeah, Intifar, so many students now, leave university and end up with a low-paying job and have hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s in debt. Not surprisingly, second on this list was home ownership. Faced with that student debt to start with, so many young people then actually have no chance of ever owning a unit or a house.
Absolutely. And this can be seen so there was a survey done by ANU, which was quite disheartening, which shows an increase in the number of young people by some 65% who are saying that home ownership is not important anymore as for the Australian way of life. Now, we like to say we are an egalitarian society. We are proud of ourselves as an egalitarian society. But the fact that young people are foregoing this dream is really sad, right? So if you look at just 25 years ago, to compare just one generation ago, it took 9 years of saving for the average household to buy an average house. But now it takes about 16.5 years. So if you're taking so much longer to buy a house, might as well be a lifelong renter, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you make that point about the dream disappearing, because we know not only is it unaffordable to own a home, but it's almost unaffordable now to try and rent because rents have skyrocketed. And in this survey, it's also the rent crisis, the housing crisis, is a major cause of psychological distress, especially among 15 to 24-year-olds. And that has actually more than doubled that psychological stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And financial stresses really has a strong link to psychological stress. If you look into this period of life of 15 to 24-year-olds, you will see that this is the time that they move out of house or attempt to move out of their parental homes, trying to probably move into an inner city if they're already not living there, where the house rental prices are higher than outside inner cities. And there's a higher competition as well. So young people, when they're really trying to establish a life, housing affordability is really standing in the way and adding to psychological distress, which shows clearly in the data that 15 to 24-year-olds are they are highly represented in the group of psychologically distressed Australians, highest among all age groups.
Intifar, when you break down also the impact of loneliness, we know for a long time it was a big issue for a lot of elderly people, especially with the breakdown in local community groups and the breakdown in sometimes isolation from family, or that you don't live close by with your family. But what's really concerning about this new research is loneliness has actually become a bigger issue for young people than it has actually for the elderly part of our populations. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and it is quite surprising because, as you mentioned, loneliness was a feature of old age, but now it kind of is becoming a defining feature of young age. So what exactly, there are multiple drivers to it. One is the COVID-19 crisis, of course. So a lot of young people that we're looking into at the moment, they entered the key transition into adulthood when COVID era was going on, which kind of exacerbated this issue of loneliness. And then there's this effect of social media, which is a bit of an oxymoronic effect because, you have social media that is supposed to be connecting people, but it's also isolating people in the most ingenious ways. And this is kind of compounding with psychological distress, isolating young people, and also getting in the way of them seeking help in various other domains of their lives, for example, education or relationships, for example. So this is really, really concerning.
It's really concerning on so many different levels that it seems to be the young people of today are fighting on so many different fronts with key economic issues, but also big issues that are dividing our society. From a positive angle, is there anything that is a silver lining for young people today who are facing so much adversity?
I think we are definitely in an era where we have a lot of access to information. And this doesn't get talked about in a positive light, but I really like to think about how much information we have available to us to educate ourselves. Obviously, there's this issue of misinformation and disinformation that concerns us, right? These days with AI and AI generated truths and facts and what have you. But I think the fact that we have an empowering sort of aspect of huge amounts of information that can help us or seek help in the right sort of avenues if we want to. So I think what is really important is placing those helps for young people and also making improving accessibility if some young person wants to reach out for help or making that easier. So yeah, I think really using social media to empower young people really in these tough times, because as we can see, they are definitely drawing the short end of the stick in so many fronts: educational, financial, economic, psychological, also relationships. So it's so important that we equip people and with accessible sources of help.
We really appreciate you joining us and shining such an important light on these real key issues that affect millions, if not tens of millions of people around the world. Thanks so much for joining us, Intifar.
My pleasure. Thank you, Natarsha.
That was Intifar Chowdhury from Flinders University. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.